A very good evening and welcome to African Perspective with me, Aldrin St-Pierre. Today on the show, we give you an update on the situation in Lesotho, then the upcoming France-Africa Summit, and a review on the Ethiopian Prime Minister's visit to South Africa. Remember that you can always interact with us by going onto Twitter using the handle @AfricanSpec1. But first, let's start here. A high-level delegation from South Africa sent by President Cyril Ramaphosa to Lesotho is expected to arrive this evening. This is amid tensions and rumors that Prime Minister Tom Thabane may step down. The ruling party, SABC, and the opposition are applying pressure for him to leave office after allegations that he is connected to his estranged wife's assassination. The Prime Minister, Tom Thabane, is alleged to be involved in his late wife's murder. A cell phone number connected to the case has been linked to him. His current wife, Mrs. Thabane, appeared in court today in connection with the killing. The matter was postponed to a later date. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa's delegation is expected to assist and facilitate a smooth transition. And French President Emmanuel Macron says this country will send an extra 220 soldiers to West Africa to fight Islamist militants after agreeing to a joint command structure with regional states to fight the growing insurgency in the area. Macron held a summit with the leaders of Niger, Mali, Mauritania, and Burkina Faso and Chad. France has about 4,500 troops already operating in the region. Meanwhile, Macron says is expected to visit South Africa in the first half of the year. The French embassy revealed that President Cyril Ramaphosa has extended his invitation and a coordination for the state visit is now underway. In June, France will host African countries in the first Africa Summit to be held in Bordeaux. France Ambassador Aureline Lechaleveur says business investment, climate change and peace and security will be high on the agenda. And the ambassador joins us this evening right here in studio. Ambassador, let's start off here. Why is this visit from the president so important?
Well, it's important to show how the relation with South Africa and France is an exceptional relation. We've had a long journey together, but we feel it's high time to build really an even stronger relation in terms of political agenda, economic cooperation, cultural exchanges also, and we have really a full-fledged agenda ahead of us. And this year will be especially important since South Africa is a member of the Security Council at the United Nations and also will chair, as you know, the African Union from February on. So really, they will have the two presidents from France and from South Africa a lot to discuss.
Has the date been decided on as yet?
Not yet. We're working on it, but it should happen before, I hope, June, because in June there will be this summit in France, the Africa-France Summit. So we would like, ideally, to have the visit to South Africa prior to the summit. We received the very kind invitation extended by President Ramaphosa to President Macron. So now we are nailing down, we are working with the agenda staff, and then we will be ready really to implement the preparation for the visits.
Yeah, security very important on the agenda, as you've mentioned now, and I'd just like you to quickly touch on that before we go into the G5 summit.
Security is very important, of course. The peace and security agenda for Africa. Today, I think South Africa and France share concerns regarding the security in Sahel, regarding the security in the eastern part of DRC, the security in Libya. So they need to act together. We need to act together. And Sahel, of course, is a big topic these days.
And of course, there was that meeting that was held by the President Macron as well as the leaders of these 5 countries, the G5 countries. Yes. What was the outcome of those discussions?
It was a good outcome, a fruitful summit, I think. It was much needed because we need more results in Sahel to improve the security and to face the threats of the terrorist groups. And unfortunately, we also suffered many casualties from the Sahel countries, but also from France. Many French soldiers fell in Sahel. And so I think that the objective of the summit was threefold. One, to express a very clear political message from the Sahel country to invite international partners, and especially France, to step up the plate, to come as partners to face the terrorist threats. And that message was very clearly sent.
And also a pledge there that 220 additional soldiers.
Exactly. The second part was really the military operation to be more efficient. Sahel is a very broad region, so the leaders, they decided to focus on a more, let's say, sensitive region called the three-border region between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where a lot of military operations will be focused. And France has already 4,500 soldiers deployed, but President Macron decided to increase a little bit the number of French soldiers, given that the mandate for their intervention is clearer. And also the third part is important, is the development, the assistance program to help the population in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of infrastructure. So we ask the international community, the European Union, the World Bank, the UN development program, also to be more active, more efficient together to try to improve the security in Sahel. And we really count on South Africa also as the future chairship of the African Union to be very, on a decisive manner, active on that
Is that something that the President Macron, would raise with President Cyril Ramaphosa when he meets him later in June? Because he would have assumed his position as chairman of the African Union. Absolutely.
That will be on the top priority on their agenda.
Yeah. Okay. And on this, the deployment of an additional 220 troops in Sahel, the concern has been that considering that France already has about 4,500 troops deployed in the area to try and quell the tensions as well as create stability in the area, what difference really would 220 additional soldiers make in that region?
Well, we have to be very clear that it's not a matter of quantity, but also of efficiency and quality. So we need these people to work on a central command, on a place where the information will be better shared and where the operations will be better coordinated. So that's also why we needed to increase the number.
How's that different from what's currently in place?
Because we need people to go on the ground, really to face the terrorist groups and the terrorist threat, but also more people to train and to coordinate and to share the information. Remember that all in all, the objective is really to strengthen the capabilities, the military capabilities of the Sahel countries. So that's why we needed maybe more trainers also to be deployed.
The reason that I asked this question as well, and I see that French 24 had also reported that there are some analysts in France who are arguing that France is fighting a losing battle in Sahel. There's no way at all that there would be victory for the people of Sahel in these current conditions as well.
It's a difficult fight. It's a very wide region, as we said. But I mean, we have to act collectively. There is no other way. Unfortunately, these armed groups, they are threatening the population from these African partners, African countries, but also the security of all Africa and of Europe. So we have to be committed. But of course, there are questions. To be more, again, effective, we have to focus, to be very clear on our framework, our action plan, collective action plan, and to make sure also that, let's say, the population are also participating in this fight in terms of information sharing, in terms of ownership also of the results. And that's also why the development component is so important on the midterm and long term.
And what does the French government then say to the French people who are saying that our soldiers are dying in Sahel? I see that since the deployment of soldiers there in the region, around 41 have died, and quite recently 13 in that helicopter crash.
It's always very difficult to suffer these casualties for the families and for a nation. But we have to explain it's our responsibility to answer the call of our partners, and also to make sure that the security of our partners, of Europe and of France, finally, and the French people is really taken into account. So again, I think it's our mission, and we have to do it efficiently and collectively.
Yeah. In the statement that was released as well, the country is of course thanking France for all the efforts, but also thanking the USA. And I wonder, with the work that the USA is giving and all the intelligence information, as well as the training that it's currently giving, do you think at all that there's something more that the US government could be doing to help quell tensions in that country, or rather in those countries?
In Sahel, I must say they're doing a lot, and for a long time, in terms of intelligence, information, providing, you know, the right information is key in that kind of fight and mission. And the US is really playing the right game there. I must say, you know, in other parts of the world, the US government or the US policies are more difficult sometimes to follow, more unpredictable. But in Sahel, I must say that the cooperation between France, the USA, and the African countries has been working very well.
From the side of the African Union, do you think that there's something more that the African Union could do?
Yes, certainly, but at the summit on Monday in France with the Sahel countries, the African Union was there. Chairman Moussa Faki attended, the UN Secretary General attended also, and the EU also new chairman. So it was not only France and the Sahel region, it was also the international organizations. And there is a clear willingness from the African Union to be engaged, to be committed. And I know also from the visit of Prime Minister Abiy from Ethiopia, and also the preparation between Egypt and South Africa for the upcoming chairship of the African Union, that this peace and security, let's say, work will be at the heart of the South African policy. And I know that South Africa will put forward this idea of silencing the gun. So really
by 2020, and we're in the year 2020.
I know, but I mean, it's a work in progress, of course. It's very difficult, but at least more commitment is needed, and again, more wise and collective work.
Yeah, the country is also saying that what's currently happening in Libya and the instability in Libya is also having a spillover effect in the Sahel region. And I wonder then, when it comes to Libya, and also considering that you had that meeting that happened in Moscow, and there was no deal that was signed there, that what more could happen in that country to find a solution and avoid the spillover effect, and where you have thousands of people being displaced as well?
Yeah, Libya is a big challenge, and a very difficult one, and the Libyan people has been suffering for too much time now. It's indeed a real problem, because we know that a lot of weaponry, ammunition in the Sahel, in the armed groups, the terrorist groups, comes indeed from Libya. So we have to stop this traffic. Also, the instability in Libya creates more human trafficking. And that's also a big issue, of course, a big challenge for the African countries and for Europe, also with illegal migration coming from human traffickers in Libya, for example. What can we do? I think we need more international community engagement, and also the African Union here can play a major role, because there were initiatives from different countries, but finally, I mean, Libya is a big African country, the neighboring countries must be involved, and we know that the African Union is ready now to really step up the plate. So we hope that in the coming weeks and months, especially with South Africa now taking the lead, more initiatives, more diplomatic initiative for a political process in Libya can really be ignited.
Is that political process having both factions around the table, having a conversation, and then finding a solution? Because I'm wondering that how do you do that if, for instance, Moscow has failed to have done that?
Yeah, I mean, we also tried before.
Yeah, and you were accused of playing both sides at some point.
We have to, have a conversation with the different leaders. It's very difficult because now there are lots of misunderstandings between the different Libyan factions, and the level of trust is very, very low. So we have to start really from limited results and step by step move forward in Libya to create this confidence building measures in the coming weeks. But it's possible. It's difficult, but that's what diplomacy is for, is to create a pathway and to find some common ground where Marshal Haftar and Prime Minister Sarraj can say, okay, let's try this, a ceasefire, electoral timeline, and maybe the unification of the institutions, and step by step moving to that direction. That's still possible, we think.
Okay, and speaking about Libya, is it still the current administration's view that the intervention of France previously in Libya that has led to the destabilization of the country was uncalled for?
Well, I think
although it was a NATO decision, NATO conversation, of course, as well as the United Nations Security Council resolution, was it the right decision in hindsight?
I would say yes. You have to remember that the situation in Libya prior to the military intervention was quite chaotic and violent. So it's not the intervention that created the violence. It was before. And also there was this very dangerous situation for the civilian people, for the population, that armed groups were moving to the city of Sirte and Benghazi to really destroy the houses. And so this military intervention, the mandate was to stop the bloodshed. And I think that was the right decision at that time, even if there are questions about that. The problem, from my point of view, is the follow-up. There was a clear lack of follow-up in terms of political process after the military intervention. So there was this big involvement from the international community, and then everyone left. And the situation was really too unstable, too violent, and finally we are in today's context where the country is divided, and there is an ever-growing, as I said, distrust between the different leaders, and so we have to build that again to create these conditions for the dialogue. But I think we missed many opportunities to accompany the right transition there.
Is it at all on the French president's agenda to play mediator?
Certainly, if there is a willingness from the international community, the UN, the African Union, France is ready to play a role, but not alone. The thing is, France is in an interesting position because we can reach out with all the different leaders on the ground. So this is certainly key. But we have to work with Italy, with Tunisia, with Egypt, with Russia, with the US. Now it has to be a collective answer.
Okay, let's move on to the United Nations Security Council. Of course, conversation around President Cyril Ramaphosa taking over as chairperson of the African Union. And then, of course, you've just mentioned during the beginning of the conversation as South Africa as a member of the Security Council. The conversation that's happening in the EU, or rather in the AU, year after year after year after year, when you listen to the different chairpersons taking over the seat, is that what should happen with the United Nations Security Council is that there must be reform of the United Nations Security Council. And the United Nations Security Council must at least include one African country as a permanent member. Where does France stand on this?
Well, we support this reform. We've been very vocal for many years. We support a reform of the format of the Security Council, an expansion of
the permanent members?
Of the permanent members, both permanent members and non-permanent members.
Okay.
We think that Africa, for example, should have a position as a permanent members and a second position as a non-permanent members. So our position is very clear. There is also an African Union consensus, but not very clear, of course, because no one wants to say, okay, it will be South Africa or another country to be permanent member. I mean, that's quite a sensitive issue.
Is there consensus amongst the permanent members, at least, that there should be a permanent member that comes from an African country?
Yes, theoretically, absolutely. There is an agreement on that. The thing with the reform of the Security Council is that no one wants to start, to give the first move, you know. That's very difficult.
What do you mean no one? No one from where?
I mean that, you know, France, for example, is saying, and it's true, it's sincere, that the Security Council of the United Nations must reflect, let's say, the world as it is today.
Yes.
So it's quite logical that Africa, for example, be represented as a permanent nation around the table. But now there was no moment yet when, let's say, among the 5 permanent members, so remember China, Russia, the US, the UK and France, and the other members, we decided really to move on and to accept this change and to say, for example, okay, next year, in 2021, the 1st of January, we will have the new format. That never happened, at least so far. Plus, there are also other questions to sort out first, including the African Union position, because it's not very clear, for example, which country would be the permanent member around the table. I think if you ask a South African representative, he will say, we think that for this and this reason, South Africa should be the permanent member, and with strong arguments. But maybe, I don't know, Nigeria will say, no, it should be us. Maybe Egypt also, as an African and Arab country, would try to promote oneself. Maybe Algeria will have. So it's not easy, but we feel it's necessary to move forward. And we heard Minister Pandor, for example, when she was in New York last September, she very vocally pushed for that reform of the Security Council. I think the moment South Africa will take the lead at the African Union, so next month, it will be important to show during 1 year, it's an annual presidency of the African Union, that really South Africa is a leader.
Should South Africa be bold enough to put its name forward?
I'm not sure that, tactically speaking, I would give this piece of advice to Minister Pandor or to President Ramaphosa. It's quite a sensitive issue, and I don't want to meddle with that. But what I would like to say is that the African Union presidency of South Africa is a very important moment to show, to express the leadership of South Africa in Africa in the next month. And I know there is an ambitious agenda, South Africa, with this silencing the guns initiative, also with the trade agreement. Remember the Continental Free Trade Agreement. South Africa wants really to push this forward. So that's very important. And France, of course, will be keen on accompanying, on supporting this ambitious agenda in the months to come.
Ambassador, just in closing, let me quickly hear your reaction to that decision that was taken by some of France's former colonies to reject the CVA franc. CFA franc rather, something that the French government supports. How far do you think these countries are to start their own currency, which is the echo?
Actually, when President Macron was elected 2 years ago, he really said he wanted to open a new chapter with Africa.
Yeah.
And I think that he's doing exactly this. There were a lot of consultations, of dialogue. This agreement on the monetary policy of the Western African countries with the franc CFA, you know, it was based on a treaty from 1973. Mm-hmm. So I think it was high time we updated this agreement. And there were also criticism. Remember, or pretext to criticize France, for example, as a former colonial power, to say, is it normal that in 2020 the monetary policy is, let's say, under the control of France, etc. Yeah. Many, sometimes fantasies, sometimes fake news, but that had a strong echo in the populations. So we decided to change this. It was really a mutual process with the African leaders and the French president. A lot of discussions took place. And finally, on the 21st of December, so very recently, the Western African countries decided to change the currency to adopt this new currency, ECO, and we are glad. We're supportive. We think it's perfect. There is still a very strong partnership with France and with the French economy, but with more sovereignty, more autonomy also from the African for the African countries.
Does part of the new chapter also include what the African Union ambassador to the United States, Dr. Arikane, was saying, that some African artifacts that are in France must be returned?
Well, actually, yes. President Macron said that he wanted this to happen, and we started to bring back cultural heritage artifacts to African countries. There was a sword, for example, given back to Senegal a few weeks ago by our Prime Minister. We're working with Benin, for example, also on the heritage. And as far as the conservation of these artifacts and their display is also well proposed by the country, we feel it's very important to work toward that direction.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
You're welcome.
That is the French Ambassador to South Africa, Aurélien Le Chevalier. African Perspective will continue just after the short break.
Kwakwakankusa. OTO time. Makrojnano. Quick time.
Birds.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, for every kind of serious, there's a glass of not so serious. Only from Tops at Spa. Not for persons under the age of 18.
Our job as the SA Today team doesn't simply start when the cameras start to roll. We also work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep you up to date with stories of the day.
What have you established as an organization, or rather as an association, regarding this WhatsApp group Stokvel?
If you look at the WhatsApp Stokvels, people join irrespective of whether they know each other or not. So the person joining is faceless. The one recruiting is also faceless. It's a disaster.
Watch SA Today every day from 3 p.m.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed seems to be using his current status to try and position his country as a powerhouse in the Horn of Africa. The Prime Minister is also working hard to build the economy of his country. Abiy Ahmed was in South Africa for a working visit. The relations between the two countries date back to exile years. President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Ethiopian counterpart addressed the meeting. Let's listen to what the Ethiopian Prime Minister had to say.
Ethiopia always believes in win-win approach with Egypt and the Sudan, and we're following the same track. And the current request for President Ramaphosa, as he is a good friend for both Ethiopia and Egypt, also as incoming AU chair, he can make a discussion between both parties so as to solve the issue peacefully, because peace is a foundation for everything here in Africa. Without having peace, we can't realize our vision of development and growth. And he is championing worldwide on this issue. That's why we're requesting as a brother and as a friendly country to negotiate between Ethiopia and Egypt, as well the Sudan. I am sure he will play a significant role on bringing us on win-win solution. On the issue of Nobel Prize, to be honest, I don't have any clue about the criteria, how the Nobel Committee select an individual for the prize. So the issue of President Trump must go to the Nobel Prize Committee. I'm not aware how they elect or select someone to provide the prize. And I'm not working for the prize. I'm working that peace is a very critical thing for our region. And if they recognize, and if President Trump complained, it must go to Oslo, not to Ethiopia. We will conduct election this year because this is constitutional mandate, and we have to live up to the Constitution. There might be lots of challenges, not only logistics, but also peace and security. But if there was no challenge, why we need to go to election? We need election because there is challenge, and we want to confront it in a very democratic way, so as to have a legitimate government. So there are lots of excuses for this, but in my opinion, it's better for Ethiopians
talking about this for election
to conduct the election on time in a very peaceful and democratic manner. From the government side, we're more than ready to conduct the election because we better work according to Constitution. But the rest must and shall be declared by election board, since the job is not for the government, it's by election board, which will be decided when and how the election will be conducted. But in my opinion, it's very important to do it on time.
Well, former Eritrea ambassador to South Africa, Professor Iqbal Jaxbeh, joins me now from our Pretoria studio. Former ambassador, good evening and welcome to good evening and welcome to African Perspective. Starting off with what the Prime Minister had to say there, and I want to ask you this question. Does he deserve the Nobel Peace Prize that he won? Because the President of the USA is saying that no ways, he is the one who deserves that prize.
There's little doubt that many of us who were on the ground, and in my case, being there as South Africa's ambassador from 2012 to 2016, we were on the ground amidst this no war, no peace situation. It was a stalemated situation, so you could feel the development of both Eritrea and Ethiopia was in many ways stilted, it was stalled. So the fact that when Prime Minister Dr. Abe came into power, he immediately, after sounding out some interlocutors, decided to announce to accept the terms of the Algiers peace agreement.
Yes.
As you recall, the previous Prime Minister Meles, he himself had a lot of goodwill, but his government did not want to accept the terms of the Algiers peace agreement. So this move was a very seminal move. And then the further seminal moment was to sign the Asmara Peace Declaration between Ethiopia and Eritrea to develop diplomatic links, movement of people, economic ties, flights. Because across each other's borders, you've got families living who suffered, and so did the country suffered. So this was, I believe, a seminal homegrown African momentum between two neighbors, Ethiopia and Eritrea, to come up with a peace agreement. And certainly he deserved the Peace Prize, and he correctly maintained and mentioned he could not have obtained this Peace Prize without a partner in peace, and that is the Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki.
But did the U.S. at all play any role whatsoever? And I understand that there was, of course, that international commission around the conflict around the borders. But did the U.S. government play any crucial role whatsoever that you can pinpoint and say that this is what the U.S. government did, but that does not necessarily mean that the U.S. government played a pivotal role in reaching that agreement?
You will see in the archives where many leaders approached the previous Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi. They approached the current President, Isaias Afwerki, but they were not very successful at all. My understanding is when Dr. Abiy came into power, he approached an Ethiopian opposition leader who stayed in the Eritrean capital, Asmara, to sound out whether the Eritreans are willing to accept a gesture from his side as the new Ethiopian Prime Minister for a peace agreement. And once that happened, through the correct channels of the advisors of the Eritrean president, he was then able to more confidently make this announcement in May 2018. Yeah. And thereafter, you find the Ethiopian Prime Minister made an official visit to Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, and the Eritrean president also, prior to that, sent a delegation to the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, and then the whole thing gained momentum. So, to my mind, it is very much a homegrown indigenous peace agreement, and it's only later the others came out to consolidate it, to nurture it, to support it.
Okay. And what has life been for Eritreans since that agreement was signed in 2018?
Now, as you can see from the archival footage, the moment this happened, thousands of people came onto the streets of both capitals, Addis Ababa and Asmara, to welcome it. The flights between the two countries were resumed. It started off with 2 flights a day. Now there are 3 flights. There was no telephonic contact, so people now can speak to each other. They can visit each other, capital. They can start trading. Initially, the borders were open. But as you correctly probably know, the northern section of Ethiopia, known as the Tigray area, were not very happy with this peace agreement because they were certainly the ruling party in the past, and they felt a bit slighted by the way this peace agreement was undertaken. But other than that, you can certainly see that peace has now unfolded key infrastructure projects, both on the Eritrean and the Ethiopian side. The Eritrean government is responding to these peace overtures very steadily because it has known that its entire history has been of war. First you had the Italian colonization, then the British, and then the Ethiopians in the past, from 1961 onwards, decided to federate Eritrea with Ethiopia up until their independence in 91. So the Eritreans respond very cautiously because of that history as the longest anti-colonial struggle in the world. But much progress has been made, as I've mentioned.
Yeah. I'm asking this question on the basis that the United Nations Refugee Agency, for instance, issued a statement saying that 2 Eritrean asylum seekers were shot inside accommodation in Tripoli. And the question then is that why are there still Eritrean asylum seekers when the tensions within the country seem to have been dampened down?
Now, as I mentioned, the country just came out of a war situation. Not only the historical perspective I mentioned, but then, as you know, when Eritrea got independence in 1991, then there was a 2-year very bitter war with a huge loss of life, 1998 to 2000. Then from 2000 until the Ethiopian Prime Minister came, both countries were in limbo on the issue of war. It was what was described as no war, no peace. So the economy could not grow in the way you wanted. Added to that, you had UN military sanctions on Eritrea, and many countries who are strong investors, barring the mining sector where South African mining companies got involved in gold, copper, zinc, and they created certain job opportunities. But those job opportunities were not sufficient for a country where its economy was at a very low level with huge potential, needed of foreign investment. So for that reason, many young people migrate towards the Sudanese border and then try to make their way to Europe via Libya or Egypt. And that explains why you have that situation. There's no doubt that initially you had the democratic evolution of Eritrea. It had a parliament, but once there was war, the parliament was abandoned, and the focus was primarily on defending its long border with Ethiopia. And clearly, the Eritrean president, in many interviews he has given now, post the peace process in 2018, he's made this point that we have to make up for the lost 2 decades in economic development and political development.
Former Ambassador, let me just quickly move on to the story, and I'd just like you to quickly listen to this report compiled by my colleague Sarah Gamani. So can South Africa, and the question that you ask is that, can South Africa help break a deadlock over the use of the Nile River waters between neighbors Ethiopia and Egypt and Sudan? President Cyril Ramaphosa has agreed to the challenge at the request of the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Ethiopia is constructing a mega hydropower dam on the Nile amid protest by Egypt and Sudan. This dispute follows a colonial era treaty that gave Egypt sole rights to the Nile waters, but Ethiopia says things must now change. Sarah Kamani has more details on that.
Ethiopia began the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam in 2011. The dam is expected to be the largest hydropower plant in Africa, generating at least 6,450 megawatts of power for domestic use and export to neighboring countries. Talks between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan have failed to reach an agreement on the technical issues, including the filling of the 4.6 billion dam. Egypt, which has for years enjoyed unrestricted use of the Nile waters, depends on the Nile for most of all its fresh water. It fears the dam will reduce water flow downstream. It wants all parties to respect a 1959 pact on water allowances, but Ethiopia says the Nile agreement should be reworked because it is colonial. After talks between the 3 countries broke down last year, Egypt sought the help of Washington in mediating an agreement. Early this week, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sought the help of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Any threat to the Nile is an existential threat to the nation of Egypt. However, the previous treaties of 29 and 59 disproportionately awarded Egypt rights to the disadvantage and detriment of actually downstream countries, and including those which are the source of the Nile waters.
Water ministers from the 3 countries, as well as the U.S. Treasury and the World Bank, will attend the Washington talks.
For something that has taken decades, it's not going to take a week or 3 days to resolve it. Of course, we know just this past week, they were unable to reach an agreement in Addis. I'm not exactly sure that that's going to be possible in Washington, D.C. And I think there are also fears by Addis Ababa that perhaps Washington, D.C. may not be exactly the appropriate place, to do that. And I think that's probably the reason why Abiy Ahmed is trying to reach out to South Africa, being an African powerhouse, and it's been involved in lots of mediation efforts on the continent.
Ethiopia plans to begin filling the dam in July this year. Should Wednesday's stock fill, then the three countries have agreed to seek the help of an international mediator. Sarah Kimani, SABC News.
Well, Prof, just listening to that report from my colleague there, Sarah Kimani, started off in Russia to try and find a mediator, to get a mediation, and there was no deal there. Went all the way to Washington, and actually by today, on the 15th of January, there was supposed to have been an agreement between the three countries. Quite certainly that's not the case as it stands. So the question that Sarah Kimani is asking is that, can South Africa play that mediation role?
There's little doubt that it's going to require a lot of hard work. But as mentioned earlier, South Africa has had a lot of experience in what may have appeared as totally intractable issues like the DRC Congo. Over a number of years, it brought all the key players and was able, like a marathon, to walk the talk and bring about a acceptable agreement in the question of DRC Congo. The same in the question of Burundi. The same applies to the question of Comoros. So I think this collective wisdom will have to be used. But also now, the biggest trading partner of South Africa in North Africa is Egypt. Previously, it was Algeria. And the two presidents seem to have developed a good chemistry. We find President Ramaphosa and many of our officials have been making many visits to strengthen those ties. And as two pivotal states who would like to see the riverine countries now benefiting from the waters of the Nile and trying to break that deadlock, I see hopeful possibilities, provided we have the right mediation team. And clearly from the past, we do have some of our very experienced, wise mediators still around.
Yeah. Does that start with, for instance, telling the two parties or telling the two presidents, and rather the president as well as the prime minister, that the type of language that's being used during these tensions must be watched very carefully, because you have the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, for instance, was quoted as saying that if there's a need to go to war, we could get millions readied. If some could fire a missile, others could use bombs, but that's not in the best interest of us all.
I agree that that language doesn't quite help. I guess often mediators and heads of states tend to use that language more to get better results on the table, and they're familiar that it's only via dialogue, negotiations, compromises that this can be advanced, that the waters of the Nile could be used for all the riverine countries. We know Sudan has its needs, South Sudan has its development water needs as well, and so does Ethiopia. So I think drawing on the best practices in mediation and compromises at the table is what is going to be at focus here to achieve the type of results we would like to see that happening. And it seems to me that the Ethiopian Prime Minister is of the view, given the experience with the Ethiopia-Eritrea peace agreement was very much a regional African-led initiative. The other partners like Emirates and others came in later more to consolidate, because peace cannot ever be taken for granted. We know both the previous Ethiopian leader Meles and the current president were buddies and comrades in the same trenches, but it just requires a few people to, in a way, to inflame the situation, or a small group of people to inflame. And we've seen that happen in the case of Ethiopia and Eritrea with the war in 1998 to 2000, and the impact that has had on both countries.
With President Cyril Ramaphosa taking up the chairmanship of the African Union next month, should this be something that he places higher in the agenda, considering that, of course, with Agenda 2063, we've got the silencing of the guns by 2020. There's no doubt that we won't be able to meet that. But the last thing that you want is loading of the guns where there was no war initially. And this is between now Ethiopia as well as Egypt.
No, it's a very important question you've raised. The reality is that silencing of the guns means a number of things, and a number of those questions need to take priority. One is whatever is there to nurture and consolidate, starting with this Ethiopia-Eritrea peace agreement, starting with also the fact that we have a Sudanese transitional government. And the other big issue which we see is huge within the African continent is that we're having lots of these climate changes with lots of floods, and the figures suggest there are more people dying via disasters of that nature than terrorism. That then suggests that the team, as they take over the chairpersonship, to discuss with other fellow African states as to how they can together develop their disaster management capabilities. You know, when there's a flood in Mozambique, it's taken as a given arrangement that South African helicopters go in, but other countries don't have that arrangement. So I think the part of the silencing of the guns is to create the type of environment where people will not be displaced, will not migrate to other parts of the world, will stay within the continent, and create the environment where the economic sectors could also grow.
Former Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. That is the former ambassador from Eritrea to South Africa, Professor Iqbal Jaxbek, joining us from our Pretoria studios. We've come to the end of this evening's program. Thank you so much for being part of the program and watching the program as well. Join us again next week when we unpack Egypt, the current AU chair, who will be handing over the reins to South Africa. So it just indicated that Cyril Ramaphosa will become the chairperson of the African Union next month, and we will be joined by the Egyptian ambassador to South Africa, Issa Sharif. Thank you for watching. Good night. Bye-bye.